Very short story, not quite a horror story, something that literally just happened. We're a level 1 party participating in our first combat. 4 rounds or so in, we hear a disconnect sound. One of the players didn't just leave the voice call, they left the Discord server, and no one can message them because they have that option on Discord that blocks messages from people you don't share a server with. It's not like they weren't involved, they had sent their DM their backstory and character art the day before the session. Backstory was light, but their character art was custom made with a video game character creator. They had been somewhat quiet in roleplay, but we assumed it was just first session uneasiness. It's funny because someone the DM had played with before asked to join, but we had already filled the party with randoms online. Everyone was great, except for the person who just randomly left. But I guess we have an empty player slot now. Don't even have to resplit the gold we got from our starting mission. While it is possible that this group was just like the worst RPG horror story of all time, and this person needed to get out as soon as humanly possible, I think they just really don't like confrontation, which, I mean, while it's not the worst thing I've ever heard, it's certainly not something I'm gonna celebrate either. This was about 14 years ago, so again, details are sparse. Got together with a local gaming group run by a local legend on the scene. He was the kind of guy who could spin finely woven tales, regardless of the setting. This time, however, he took the player's chair next to mine while his best bud ran a game of good old school Stormbringer. For those who don't know, Stormbringer was a very powerful magical sword that featured in a bunch of novels. Just a short bit on character creation, every aspect of it was random. So what do I roll? A carpenter. No combat abilities of any kind, while everyone else rolled up something at least somewhat oriented towards adventuring. I was introduced to the party as my poor carpenter self got a severe case of curiosity and headed over to where they were. One of the party, we'll call Jerk 1, was separated from the rest and found a potential place for lots of good stuff. And a death trap that killed him. Immediately, he started rolling up a new character for the sole purpose of getting his stuff, including a magical cloak of sneakiness, I think. Anyway, I gotta love metagaming, right? Before he could employ his new character, however, he had to leave. Instead, the DM said nope to the metagame, and when I found the place and survived the trap, I got the loot, including the cloak and the most valuable treasure anyone could ever receive. Not gold, not jewels, not even the most powerful magical weapon ever. I'm talking about a deed to land, 40 acres, and a mansion. The next week, the first thing Jerk 1 did was yell at me that he wanted his cloak back. Not wanting to be a jerk myself, I let him have it. Later in the session, we beat a mini-boss and looted the stuff off of him, including a magical short sword. Both he and another player, we'll call this one Jerk 2, rejected it out of hand. They wanted a long sword, not whatever this was. So guess who they dumped it off to? That's right, the lonely carpenter. Me. After the session, levels were gained, and I was persuaded to level up my short sword skill, which I did to maybe a semi-passable level, but then the sword's true nature came to light. It was revealed it was a sister blade to Stormbringer itself. Later on, another fight happened in which my poor, simple carpenter barely survived. So what does a simple tradesman with newfound wealth and a bunch of land do after a brush with death? I retired my guy and took his super short sword home with him. To say that Jerk 1 and Jerk 2 were a bit salty would be an understatement. I passed a note over to the aforementioned legend, noting how unhappy they were at what I did. His response? Boo-hoo! Long story short, too late, I rolled up a new character, and the next week, the jerks were still complaining. The week after that, however, things blew up. Too bad I wasn't there to see it, though. Apparently, Jerk number 2 started going off the rails over every single little thing, and Jerk 1 was blatantly cheating on his rolls. Both men were kicked, and Jerk 2's wife went right with him. The campaign ended right there and right then. Their whole refusal of loot that's actually good and instant regret reminds me of Destiny 1, way back when Xur, the exotic merchant, sold the rocket launcher Gallarhorn, and everybody said, "Why would I buy an exotic heavy weapon? What a waste of your exotic slot." Then it turned out Gallarhorn was actually the best weapon in the game by a mile, and everyone who didn't buy it bitterly resented their missed opportunity. That's these two guys, but these two guys took it another step further by going off the rails even more after the guy who got the weapon just retired the character, which Awesome move, by the way. Totally makes sense for the carpenter to retire. And also, playing a carpenter, who presumably is less powerful than the rest of the heroes, is probably less of a good idea. But frankly, a carpenter retiring with a legendary short sword to a happy farm, you know, that's pretty cool. Well, here's a tale about one of my more unpleasant RPG experiences. It wasn't so much one big behavior that turned me off from the DM, but a bunch of little things that drove me up the wall until I left. I won't bother listing the players as they're largely irrelevant. The DM was the main issue here. He was running the same module, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, with 2 different parties on 2 different days. Allegedly, we were both in the dungeon at the same time, but it really didn't make much of a difference that I could see. This was my first experience with 5th edition outside of con one-shot settings. I was still learning the system beyond the basic 1d20 plus modifiers. I certainly knew nothing about the different monsters or what their capabilities were, beyond the vaguest orcs are big and strong, goblins small and conniving and quick, etc. I was told a friend of a friend would be running an online 5th edition campaign, and I might want to check it out. It was a dungeon crawl using the Dungeon of the Mad Mage module. I'd never done a flat-out dungeon crawl before, and it sounded like it could be fun. All characters started at level 5, and the basic starting gear for all of our classes. So, I decided to roll up a bard. I figured having a versatile spellcaster would be handy, and it looked more interesting than my prior experience with the class in Pathfinder, another long and sordid tale I'd love to share someday. I chose College of Valor. The first issues came up at the very start of the game. Number 1, if your character died, you could bring in a new character at level 1, lower than the lowest level member of the party. The DM boasted that this could mean a character was a full 7 levels lower than the highest level player characters. I still don't really know how the math works out on that. So like weird flex about not caring about party balance or fun, but sure, fine. 2, we were playing on Roll20 with the Fog of War on, mainly because the DM's player character had a meltdown when it was turned... Wait, what? Oh, PC like a computer. Jeez. Our DM's personal computer had a meltdown when it was turned off. But also, if your character got separated from the others, too bad, so sad, you're on your own until you can find them. Other players are also not allowed to ping themselves to help you find them. Which, yeah, you could probably understand how chaotic it would be to move around the VTT outside of initiative order. It meant we were slowed down to an utter crawl just so we don't get split off. It also meant you couldn't look away from the screen for 30 seconds, since the rest of the party scooted off and you didn't notice as a player, even if your character would have no issue noticing. And you were screwed in that case. I later got a look at the map on the level of the dungeon we started on. It's a gigantic maze of corridors. God help you if you need to go to the bathroom or something and they didn't notice or hear you saying you were AFK for 2 minutes. I should have taken all this as a warning and bailed. Instead, I stuck around for 3 sessions, feeling, hey, I have nothing better to do. We began playing. Now, make no mistake, I knew this was going to be a dungeon crawl and was braced for a bit of a meat grinder. I was, however, expecting, a fair meat grinder. It was anything but. Some of the greatest hits included, 1. Our roles were open in the VTT. His were done in person. He mysteriously made saving throws on enemies to a highly improbable degree. This was explained as, I'm just ungodly lucky. I think he failed 2 saving throws in all the sessions that I played. 2. An utter and complete lack of any room description or setting information. Every room looks the same as the one before. We want information about what a statue looks like. Better hope you do well on multiple perception or investigation rolls. Skills like persuasion also mean nothing. Try to negotiate with some goblins to open a door so we can avoid a big thing that's coming down the hall. Nope, a 25 is not good enough. Oh, and if you keep trying to figure something out, the GM will loudly count down and talk over you until something nasty jumps you. Countdowns like that are a massive... Well, look, they're infuriating to me. 4. Totally ignoring things like passive perception. You'll just blunder into a gelatinous cube, a trap, a pit, etc., regardless of how high your passive perception is. Mine was 17, and I didn't notice anything amiss for the gelatinous cube. Still salty about that one. 5 is circumstances in the dungeon changing for no reason at all. Doors that we passed through suddenly became impassable for a period, then suddenly became passable again after we explored some corner of the dungeon for 2 hours. We did not trigger any magical traps or levers or anything. The door just mysteriously unbarred itself for no clear reason. 6. Not assuming our characters had basic setting knowledge, which should have been established at session 0. We got attacked by a troll or some bugbears without being told what they are. I target the troll with spell, I say, only to be told, if you know what the monster is, don't tell anyone. That's metagaming. Which, like, I get if it was something obscure, but it seems odd for someone in the Forgotten Realms to not know what a troll is. They're fairly common, no? Similarly, I was shouted out for metagaming when I hazarded a guess. He's probably not very bright when choosing a spell. Again, I had no idea, like, what the stat block of a troll was. It was an educated guess. 7 was just sheer information deprival. We never got any clues to puzzles or traps. We literally had to pry every last iota of information out of this guy. This, coupled with the lack of description, led to just blandness. The final straw, for me, campaign-wise, came when we encountered what I now know is a shield guardian. This thing fired some sort of stone collar at us that naturally latched around my bard's neck. It of course targeted AC, not a saving throw. Suddenly, I couldn't cast spells anymore. Magic from other people didn't affect it. Trying to chip it off with Mason's tools didn't affect it either. At this point, I was a rogue without sneak attack. Nothing anyone tried got it off, even after consulting with the party's artificer. Any in-character inquiries to any sort of knowledgeable power got useless answers. I vaguely recall a secret room where we could ask the builder of the dungeon any 3 questions he had to answer truthfully. My character asked how to get the collar off and was told, use your imagination. Realizing that I was having no fun at all, I made an excuse and left the campaign after this session. I later found out through a friend that the collar basically didn't allow someone to cast spells with verbal or somatic components to them. So that's basically the entire Bard spellbook. They also let me know that the campaign hemorrhaged players. The DM had to combine both parties together, and even that limped on for only 2 more sessions. So yeah, maybe not the worst campaign I've ever been in. I've got 2 doozies in my past, but still something I want to get off my chest. You know, when people say things like, no guys, it gets way worse, that doesn't make me feel better. It does not comfort me at all. But anyway, what did we learn from this? Well, this is actually a great point of view into what hostile DMing does from a practical standpoint. This DM was doing a lot of things that are kind of normal in D&D. Rolling behind the DM screen and not showing your players is pretty normal. Having plot points not reveal themselves immediately, like maybe somebody was magically messing with the doors. That's pretty normal. But the problem here is that there's no trust between the players and the DM. I've done plenty of mysterious plot points that go unexplained for a little bit. I roll behind the screen all the time. My players think nothing of it because I've never used either of those things to hurt them. But this DM does the opposite. This DM uses those quote-unquote advantages to screw over the players, which degrades trust, which, as we see here, is required. You could be doing completely normal things in D&D, and it looks bad because of the lack of trust the players have in you because of your hostile demeanor. OP's description was right. It's a bunch of small things that really add up to an extremely irritating game, and that is not a game that I think any of us want to be a part of. A friend I met over Final Fantasy XIV years ago introduced me to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Since I only played 3.5 a decade ago, it was practically new to me. But instead of normal D&D, we played Iron Kingdom's Requiem. Think steampunk meets post-apocalypse in 5th edition. She introduced me to her group of 6, and we got into making our characters. I settled on a lady orc gunfighter, literally a fighter that uses guns, who had a past lover she hoped to see again one day. As the campaign went on, we had a great laugh. Though getting into the mindset of my orc, I'd set the bad guy's lodge on fire so they'd scuttle out. This nearly set our ranger on fire, and everyone got disgruntled after the session, throwing small jabs at my part compared to everyone else. I just ignore it, seeing it as myself overthinking, and look forward to the next session in a fortnight. For the next 11 sessions after that, they'd either ignore my input on jobs to take or tell me to stop speaking over the others. I really don't talk much in general, and D&D has helped me open up more. Also, our ranger went to the hospital for arm pain, and we all wish them the best recovery too. Fast forward, and our party would be on a train transporting goods for a big payday, but the train would be attacked by my orc's lover. Tried my best to really roleplay out her conflict, but when stating I was going to leave with her, they'd all attack my character instead of the goons. Though the DM did give my orc and her lover a bittersweet ending of holding each other's hands as they both died by the party's hands, everyone again started talking about how much they didn't like the orc because she betrayed them and all that, which I just kind of awkwardly laughed off. So now that you know some of the background, here's where the horror bit comes in. 2 nights before the session, I had a massage from my mom, sports massage therapist, as my neck and back were downright painful. But I felt and heard a loud crack, which ended up giving me pain in my chest. I could hardly breathe, and it felt like something was stabbing and twisting. This pain got so bad, I went to A&E. We waited for hours and got sent home, only for the pain to get worse the next night. An ambulance was sent to pick me up, and I was in the hospital for 5 days. Turned out I had a gallbladder attack, and it's believed that the massage pressure helped move the small stones I had, which if they took any longer treating me, it could have been dire. Doctor's words, not mine. After being released from the hospital, I'd returned home to inform the group what happened, but came back to this message from the DM. Okay, well, not hearing anything from you is a real shame, and if you were not showing up, I wish you would have said something, as we've been waiting for you, so you'll have to catch up next fortnight. I explained I was in the hospital only to be questioned why I didn't take my phone, like a normal person, so I could let them know to carry on without me. No matter the explanation I had, they'd have a snappy retort. I couldn't deal with their entitled ego that night. Same for the others in the group. I ignored them and spoke with my best friend, who told me to just ditch him and play Power Wash Sim with her instead. I ended up seeing how the next session would be, and boy, that was an instant mistake. I was 1 minute late due to cooking dinner and got scolded for holding them up, as usual. Something inside me snapped and I just flipped. I let them all have it, throwing out all my anger at the group, from the DM's man-childish behavior to how when our group's ranger went to the hospital for a bruise, it was respectful. But while I was in the critical ward, I'm verbally spat on and some other things, but I don't think it's best to repeat them here, as it got really nasty. Then I just left the group, trying not to let them know how upset I'd gotten. While I do enjoy TTRPGs, I haven't played since, and as much as I miss D&D, the group kind of killed it for me. I play to relax and forge great memories, not to treat it like a stressful job and feel isolated. While I understand being upset over a no-call, no-show, sometimes real emergencies happen, and this was a great example of a real emergency. Making someone feel bad for going to the hospital is just... it's never a good look. At the end of the day, Dungeons & Dragons, all TTRPGs, they're a game. Yes, they're a commitment, and it's good to show up, and I think it's bad to be flaky when it comes to scheduling, just because, you know, you gotta respect time commitment. But at the same time, this person wasn't trying to disrespect anyone's time commitment. They had to go to the hospital for a medical emergency. On top of all that, the hypocrisy of completely being okay with another player going to the hospital, it just showcases a group that has a little bit of favoritism on their hands. That's also completely ignoring the fact that the group also did something pretty brutal to the orc character at the beginning of the story. Just all in all, I don't think it's worth playing with this group. Danger. I should start by giving some context about the situation. We are a group of 5 friends I've put together in which we simultaneously played several campaigns at once, so we don't have those forever GM problems. And we all get to be players at one point. The people involved are me, Amy, Regina, Mary, and the protagonist of our story, Joe. I met him via a mutual friend we had, and although we never spoke much, we usually got along well, and he appeared to be a very sweet person. And although he had a very obvious crush on me, I felt like he never had been weird about it. Until later, but the crush thing will be very relevant later on. Anyways, I invited him to play with us since he often asked, and although we were suspicious of him at first, he ended up being a great player. Again, at first. But that quickly devolved into always looking for power trips and even forcing PvP onto other players. This did not matter much as we thought the problem was his player character rather than him. So we allowed him to stay in the group, and it eventually was his turn to be the game master. At first, during planning, he was communicative and asked us what we want to see in the world and what experience we wanted and our characters, etc. All seemed pretty good. There were some weird tidbits, like him making me change my player character's backstory, having me kill my player character's mother, another detail that will be important later on, but I did not think much of it. Anyways, when the game actually started, it was great. Joe was very good at creating immersive descriptions. The world building was very interesting, and the NPCs felt pretty good. But then some weird things started happening, and I'll just start with the regular bad GM stuff that usually ruins games. I did mention how Joe was kinda obsessed with power, and it started showing with how his NPCs started behaving, taking just too much spotlight and not allowing us to do things. Joe would begin just describing stuff and dragging us along with it, not even letting us act or prompting us to do anything, and if we tried, it simply did not matter. We did not care much about this railroady type attitude at first. It was like, whatever, but there was a point when it just all came crashing down. To put it simply, Joe was obsessed with realism and gray situations, so he wrote a quest like that. It was basically to assassinate a corrupt and evil nobleman, who although he was a terrible person himself, he kept his subjects safe and his district rich. A lot of people benefited from his nobleman management of things. Amy and my player characters refused to take on this quest since they believed the benefits of doing nothing outweighed actually killing this guy. Joe was very upset by this. After session, he asked to talk to me separately. I knew it was going to be uncomfortable, so I asked Mary to stay, which she did. But the moment she went AFK for a second, Joe began crapping on both me and my character, blaming me for potentially ruining his game and basically telling me how crappy my character was for not being more sociopathic. He began threatening me with in-game consequences, which was weird as hell. Basically, this whole berating thing about how terrible my character was, and how I played him, of course, went on for more than an hour. At first, I did not care much about it, but as the week went by and it was time for the next session, I started to feel guilty over it. I talked with the other players about how we could fix the situation with the quest Joe had given us. I had really enjoyed the game so far, and I did not want it to die over this or over anything. So next session rolled around, and the other two PCs, Regina's and Mary's, convinced mine and Amy's to go kill the nobleman after all. Amy and I still roleplayed that our characters did not like this decision, and again, this made Joe very angry, to the point where he simply went semi-AFK after an interaction between my player character and Amy's, and shortly after was like, I have to go, bye, and simply leaving like that. Turned out, he did not like our PCs because they were too realistic, and how they made the situation grayer than it had to be, comparing our characters to Regina's, who was his clear favorite. The game stopped being enjoyable after this, as Joe started punishing Amy and I over everything, putting our player characters in awful situations, interrupting us whenever we spoke. There was one session in which I literally had 0 turns and could not speak for more than 5 minutes, in 3 whole hours, having all NPCs suddenly become rude and dismissive towards us and taking away rewards / money / etc. It got to a point in which Amy asked for a break from the game. Her character simply was to go away for a couple of sessions and he would come back later. And predictably, these couple of sessions were the last ones, with the straw being with Joe acting once more to spite me, trying even to spontaneously just kill my player character that last session. That was it for me. We basically tried to find a way to just kill the game quietly and be done with it, since we had not thought about all the other BS he had done, and we were just upset about this last session. But this made us think of the campaign as a whole and how weirdly he had managed things so far, starting up with how he made sexual comments about my character nearly every session for the smallest things possible that had no sexual connotation whatsoever, with Joe even starting to threaten that he'd add... How are we just thinking about this now? It started to get much weirder when Joe started making sexual comments about my character with my character's mother, and then added into the story how my character's mother's spirit was basically semi-possessing my character, which is probably why he told me to kill her off in his backstory in the first place, which would not be too bad on its own if it wasn't for the weird Oedipus thing Joe wanted to add. And now he'd often make jokes about how my player character's mother would dominate him. Simultaneously, Joe would send me messages asking me weird stuff as well, telling me to be his mommy and asking me to... the story was he? Oh, right here. He was asking me to dominate him and all that sort of crap, sometimes sending lewd images and so on. I believe you guys can see the pattern here with him projecting his, things onto my character. During all this time, I really did not think much of it. It was until, like I said, the other players and I started discussing and looking back on the campaign as a whole, which made us pay attention to all the sick crap he was putting in there and how obsessed he was with control, but also with his stupid, things. Also made us find out about how he sent messages to all of us, except for Regina. Needless to say, after this, I decided to tell him directly and stop being so considerate towards him, since he had clearly been an ass since the first days of his campaign, and of course, cut all contact with him too. We're all much happier now. There is a lot more to say about him as a player. We played with him for a little more than a year after all, but for now, I think these have been his worst offenses. Sorry I got super long, and thank you for reading. Hope you guys don't find yourself in this sort of situation. Okay, for a second, let's just forget about the crazy Oedipus complex because I don't want to think about that, and neither do you. And let's get back to the problem GM. GMing takes a lot of responsibility, and I think it's really cool that this whole group is kind of shouldering that burden. If people want to play, they can play. If people want to GM, they can GM. I think that's really, really cool. But here we see a player who becomes a GM and uses it as an excuse to just go on more of a power trip. I think people with main character syndrome make for bad players, but I think they make for worse GMs because the GM shouldn't take the focus. The GM should support the players as they experience the story, present them with situations so that they can work their way through it. And as a GM, that means that sometimes you're going to be purposefully taking a backseat, which a main character syndrome addled player may have a problem doing. And of course, include the weird flirting thing and the whole mommy thing, and you have a recipe for disaster that just goes beyond much of what we've read before. Look, this guy can have whatever preference he wants in the comfort and privacy of his own home. However, forcing it on other people, that is the biggest no-no I could possibly think of at the moment. Alright, that's going to be today's episode of RPG Horror Stories. We've been making little additions to the series as we go along. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. But anyway, if you guys enjoyed, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out our Tavern Adjacent podcast where we talk all things tabletop while also taking some of your voicemail horror stories. It's linked in the cards, and while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. If you want to leave your own stories, emails in the description. If you want to leave your own thoughts, head down to the comments. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment. What do you mean by mommy? To let me know you made it to the end of the video. And that's like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.